When it comes to things like air superiority, if you don't have to think about it, you're probably winning. The ground pounders in the armed forces of the United States have it pretty good in that regard. They can be reasonably sure that if they're going into a combat situation, death will likely not be coming from above. But what happens to ground troops who send in forces without really thinking about an air force? If air power isn't a priority, going to war in the 21st century is a terrible idea. We're not here to make fun of countries who don't have an air force, especially if they aren't going around rattling sabers all the time. The reason a country's air force makes this list is because they're patched together with bubblegum and wishes and expected to fight a war with awful training, no funding, and little regard from the government for the lives of the people expected to keep their terrible air forces flying. These are the 10 worst air forces in the world in 2018. Number 10. Canada. It's hard to see such a stalwart US ally make the list, but here we are. In our last rundown of the world's airborne worst, we specifically mentioned how terrible the state of Canada's CH-124 Sea King fleet was. Just to get them airborne required something like 100 hours apiece. Replacing them was just as laborious. It took more than 20 years of political wrangling to get to a point where they could first fly its replacement, the Sikorsky CH-148 Cyclone. But the helicopter fund doesn't stop there. The bulk of the Royal Canadian Air Force's helicopter fleet is flying the Bell CH-146 Griffin, a bird known to cause constant, debilitating neck pain in most of the pilots who fly it. Canada never learned from its own cautionary tale. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pushed the FA-18 Super Hornet for Canada's next-gen strike fighter to replace the aging CF-18s ordered by his father in the 1970s, while the rest of its Western allies are upgrading to the F-35. You can do better, Canada. You can do better. Number 9. China. Yeah, I know most of you call bullshit immediately, but hear me out. For all its talk, China isn't currently capable of global reach and isn't expected to be until 2030. It has a relatively small number of early warning aircraft and aerial tankers. Most of its aerial fleet are licenses or rip-offs of other, better fighting systems. And the vaunted Chinese Chengdu J-20 fighter was rushed into production with a less than adequate engine, which negates any stealth capabilities it has and weakens its performance as a 5th-generation fighter. More than that, when was the last time China did anything with its air force other than attempt to intimidate weaker neighbors in the South China Sea? It wasn't a real factor in the Chinese wars with India and Vietnam, but where it was a factor, the Korean War, the Taiwan Strait crisis, and the US-Vietnam War, a lack of any air combat doctrine and investment in air power led to heavy losses and big lessons for the PLAAF. It wasn't until after the Gulf War of 1991 that Chinese leaders decided to really give air power another shot, both in terms of technology and investment. But China still has a long way to go. Number 8. Greece. There are a lot of training accidents in the Hellenic Air Force. After a Greek Mirage 2000 crashed into the Aegean Sea in April 2018, a look back at the incidents reported to Greek officials found 125 people died in 81 crashes between 1990 and 2018. 2 of those were Greek fighter pilots trying to intercept Turkish jets. Since the Greek government debt crisis, the Greek military has to be incredibly cautious with the money it spends. Every time a Greek fighter has to scramble to intercept a Turkish fighter in their airspace, it bleeds Greece of euros better spent elsewhere. That might be why Turkey does it more than 1,000 times every year. And there's nothing the Greeks can do about it except go up and meet them, with antiquated equipment, due to the steep budget cuts demanded by Greece's creditors. Turkey will soon be flying F-35s like most NATO allies, while Greece, also a NATO ally but Turkey doesn't care, will be, quote, intercepting them, end quote, with F-16s at best and maybe an F-4 Phantom at worst. Number 7. Iran. The F-14s flown by Iran these days were first introduced under President Richard Nixon. Don't get me wrong, Iran's Air Force should be given props for keeping the aging fleet airborne. Iran's F-14s were purchased by the Shah of Iran, and when he was overthrown, the US wasn't exactly keen on providing spare parts to the Islamic Republic. They were able to kick ass against Saddam Hussein's Iraqi Air Force in the Iran-Iraq War, but that was then, and this is now. Those things are held together with duct tape and wishes by now, with only 7 operational Iranian Air Force F-14s. The Islamic Republic now has to use homegrown technology to replace certain avionics systems and weapons on its aging aircraft, even going so far as to claim an old American F-5F was an Iranian-built 4th-gen fighter in 2018 because it had a lot of Iranian-built components. In fact, Iran is just using F-5s as a blueprint of Frankenstein, quote, new fighters, end quote, from its old garbage, most of which is left over from the Shah or was captured from the Iraqis. Even the IRIAF's ejection seats can't save its pilots. Number 6. Ukraine. Ukraine has a definite Russia problem. Not content to simply let his divorce with Ukraine happen, Russia's Vladimir Putin is out to give Ukraine headaches wherever possible, and Ukraine can do little about it. Its airplanes even go down without enemy help, as seen in the 2018 Su-27 crash in western Ukraine that killed a California Air National Guard pilot. In fact, other Su-27s have crashed, including one at an air show that killed 83 people. The national interest said these crashes are either a result of poor maintenance, poor training, and/or daredevil flying. The truth is probably a combination of the three. To top it all off, Ukraine's Air Force is so old, it was mostly handed down from the Soviet Union after the fall of communism in the East. The old airframes are no match for the advanced surface-to-air missiles being fired at them from the separatists. When Russia captured 45 planes from Ukraine's Su-29 fleet in annexing Crimea, they probably just did Ukraine a huge favor. Number 5. Pakistan. On any global list of shit talkers, Pakistan has historically rated very high, especially toward its longtime arch nemesis, India. After fighting 4 pitched wars against India and losing all of them, prioritizing air power would seem to be the way forward if Pakistan was still going to rattle their saber every so often. Rand Corporation studies still declare that the Indian Air Force would have air superiority in any war against Pakistan. Only very recently has Pakistan decided it would be best to upgrade their fighter aircraft. So, in a joint venture with China, they created a bargain basement version of the F-16, the JF-17 Thunder, which now makes up the bulk of the PAF. To give you an idea of how ineffective the Thunder is, China doesn't even fly it. Neither does anyone else. The aircraft is dangerous to fly at lower speeds. It can't fly as fast as older Pakistani airframes, and certainly not as fast as India's fighters. And it can't use similar avionics and some munitions as another fighters, which was one of the missions in creating the fighter in the first place. If all they wanted to do was replace their old fleet, then mission accomplished. If they wanted to beat India in an air war, well, it just doesn't look good. But it remains to be tested. Number 4, Mexico. Mexico has been fighting a war against the cartels for over a decade now, and all it got them was an increase in violence that made them the Syria of North America. In all that time, not only did the Mexican government decide not to invest in its air forces, it actively allowed all of its fighter aircraft to retire. Mexico has 0 fighters. While fighter aircraft aren't necessary as a deterrent for aggressive neighbors, the cartels the country is actively fighting regularly uses aircraft to violate Mexican airspace and move illegal substances that fund the ongoing fight against the Mexican government and rival cartels. The aircraft the FAM does fly can't fly high or fast enough to intercept aircraft used by drug smugglers and their leadership. The Mexican Air Force has gone full Afghanistan with its fleet, focusing on drones, light attack aircraft, and troop transports. This is particularly bothersome to its northern neighbors, especially the United States, who considers the defense of the hemisphere a multilateral issue. But ultimately, it's also just proving to be ineffective. Number 3, Saudi Arabia. In a prolonged conflict, a good air force positions its resources so that it has positive control over that battle space. When Saudi Arabia fights a prolonged war, not so much. Welcome to 2018, where the Saudi-led coalition against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen is getting ready to begin another year of abject failure. Not only has the Saudi coalition turned Yemen into an ongoing humanitarian crisis, no amount of foreign training is making the situation any better. The US Congress may soon vote over whether or not American participation in the conflict can continue after the Saudis used an American-made bomb to hit a school bus of civilian children in Yemen, killing 40. That's not even the first incident of indiscriminate killing of civilians. In October 2016, Saudi warplanes hit a civilian funeral in an attack that killed 155 Yemenis. The problem with the Royal Saudi Air Force isn't that their planes are antiquated. The problem is their choice of, quote, military targets, end quote. Get your together, Saudi Arabia. Number 2. Of course, North Korea is going to be at the bottom of this list. Kim Jong-un's Air Force is still relatively similar to the one used by his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, and the Chinese People's Liberation Army against UN forces in the last full-scale war fought on the Korean Peninsula in 1953. As a result, the North Korean Air Force is widely acknowledged as the least threatening arm of the North Korean military. I imagine that the purpose of the North Korean Air Force is to take the brunt of any initial counterattack from the US and allied air forces in the event of a war. Sure, it's a large air force, but it won't last long in a war, despite their government's consistent threats. Number 1. Syria. It's a really good thing the Syrians are being backed up in the air by Russians, because if they didn't, the Syrian civil war would last a lot longer than it already has. Almost every other power present in the region violates Syrian sovereignty on an almost daily basis. Israel, Turkey, and even Denmark have entered Syrian airspace, with Israel and Turkey both scoring air-to-air kills against Syrian Sukhoi fighters old enough to have fought against the US in Vietnam. It's also not great to be an airman in the Syrian Air Force. Besides getting shot down by everyone, including a US FA-18 Super Hornet, Syrian fighter pilots face advanced surface-to-air missiles their airframes aren't prepared to evade. They accidentally veer into their neighboring countries, even getting shot down in Israeli airspace, and were the first target of the US retaliatory strike for the Syrian military's use of chemical weapons. Within 16 months of the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, a Syrian Air Force pilot flew his MiG-21 to Jordan, where he defected. The only surprise here is that there aren't more just like him. So, that's our list. Leave us a comment and let us know which country you would add to it.